Friends, welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It's not difficult for you, but it's nice for me, and we're starting. Julia sank into an upholstered chair at her workplace and exhaled with relief. Phew. The festive day at work, one might say, was almost over. Her desk and nightstand were decorated with bouquets of flowers, sweets, and all sorts of cute trinkets that are usually given at work on her birthday. Julia bravely endured all the congratulations and wishes about how much she means to the company, how happy everyone is to work with her, success and strength for new work achievements. Sometimes sincere, sometimes on duty, sometimes forced, sometimes sycophantic. But your birthday in the labor collective cannot do without it in any way. And in response to all the congratulations, she smiled, thanked, and invited everyone to taste the treats that she had prepared for the team in the recreation room. But now the business and congratulations were over. Ahead was a restaurant and a celebration with friends and family. Her husband was supposed to arrive soon and pick up the culprit of the celebration in order to deliver her to this very celebration. In the meantime, it was possible to take a breath. Left alone with her thoughts for this time, she closed her eyes and spun around in her chair, stretching out her legs in black stockings and high-heeled patent leather shoes of the same color. Well, just like a spinning top in a well-known intellectual game. This is not respectable behavior at all for an adult woman and the head of a department of a reputable company. But today it is possible, and no one sees it. Daiwa, 45 years old. How time flies. It seemed that quite recently she came here after the institute as a young intern and, once, a respectable and respected businesswoman, family, husband, adult children. The eldest will graduate from university soon, and he's about to make a grandmother. Yulchik, Yulek, Yuliasha, Yulia, Yulenka. These addresses remain somewhere in the increasingly distant past. Now she was called very rarely, and only by her closest and old friends. For most, she has long been Yulia Viktorovna. At such moments, it is difficult to describe all the emotions and thoughts. It seems to be a holiday, but always with a touch of sadness. In your youth, you want to grow up, namely, grow up, while remaining the same young and beautiful. But so that no one can tell you, when you're older, you'll understand. But at some point you realize that this older is not so happy, and you remember those times with some warmth and bright sadness. I wish I could go back there, at least for a little while. And over the years, the higher the number in the age column, the more this regret is felt. All this flashed through the birthday girl's mind while she was spinning in her chair in a very childish, carefree way. But it didn't last long. The improvised spinning top soon slowed down and stopped, and Julia's outstretched legs pointed at the mirror in the corner of her office. Julia opened her eyes slightly and smiled in a detached way, looking at her reflection, slightly tilting her head to the side. Yes, the passage of time cannot be stopped. But a beautiful, slender, well-groomed, blue-eyed, long-haired brunette in an elegant business suit was looking at her from the mirror. Not a girl, of course. Julia hated it when someone, trying to compliment her, tried to cut off her 10 to 15 years and then wonder at her real age. It smelled fake, and that was the most annoying thing. Well, you can't confuse a mature woman with a young girl. Another question is what this mature woman looks like. Julia accepted her age, did not try to look like a girl, did not try to behave like a girl, but at the same time kept herself in shape. Beauty treatments, exercise, diet, well, and genetics, of course. Let's not dissemble. Not always one desire in adulthood is enough. There is heredity, metabolism, hormones, and all sorts of other little things that made some of Julia's peers and girlfriends into such age-related ants who were in no way associated with love desires. But she avoided all this and looked great, which she was well aware of. And to regret something very much in her position would be simply ingratitude to fate. At work, she achieved considerable success, became a member of the management team. There is a family at home, a beloved husband, 2 beautiful children. Those passions that had been there before, of course, were no longer there. But this was her man, and she was happy with him. And, despite her far from young age, entertainment in the bedroom was far from uncommon in her married life. She and her husband could well be called a beautiful and loving couple, what not everyone could boast of at their age. And those cases on a business trip and vacation at sea, where she once went without her husband with her then young children, did not affect this in any way. Just the sea, the sun, and a muscular yoga instructor. Julia, to be honest, never really worried that she couldn't resist then. And, to paraphrase one famous saying, she treated it like, what was at sea will remain at sea. Someone will condemn her, and they will be right about something. But Julia had her own view of life, based on experience, among other things, and understood that a strong family is not a poster picture where two people hold hands and walk along the path of life through a blooming garden, enjoying each other to the sound of birds singing and not paying attention to anyone. Everything is much more complicated in life. And about these adventures, it could be said that this is the leftist who strengthens marriage. And over the decades of living together, it was not an impressive list of adventures at all. Although on the other hand, cheating is cheating. A soft noise from the next room made Julia take her mind off all these thoughts. Behind the door of her office, in the hall, there was a department that she led, consisting of several managers. But the working day was over a long time ago, and everyone should have already left. Is it that Pasha again? Julia thought without any irritation, rather even approvingly, with a smile. Pasha was still a very young, handsome guy of 23 years old, with a strong physique, who was only at the beginning of his career. He got a job at this firm just a week ago and was on probation. Julia immediately liked him for his diligence. He still lacked experience and knowledge of local peculiarities, but he clearly sought to fix it as soon as possible. He was constantly late, often left alone, trying to figure it out, and if something was unclear, he asked. Julia did not rush to conclusions yet, but after a few days she took a liking to him and even took care of him in a motherly way, because he was almost the same age as her eldest son. Julia wanted to get up from the chair, but she just stretched lazily and rolled in the chair to her computer. As the head of the department, she had a program installed with which she could, without attracting attention, connect to the desktop of any of her subordinates and see what he was doing. It wasn't a secret, but maybe Pasha didn't know it yet. And even if he had known, no one would have allowed him to turn it off. However, Julia trusted her managers, and it didn't matter to her what they were doing right now, as long as they followed the plan. Therefore, she very rarely used this program. But now she was bored, her husband hadn't arrived yet, and the newcomer needed more supervision. She connected to Pasha's computer to check her guess about who was making noise there. Well, that's right, he is. She saw familiar tables and databases, and even ran her eyes over a couple of columns while the newcomer, unsuspectingly, hammered data into them. Well done, you'll go far, Julia nodded approvingly when everything in her check came together. Some people didn't even have a month for this, but look how smart you are, Julia smiled. Already about to close the window with her new subordinate's desk, but then the tables collapsed. Pasha, it seems, decided to finish working with documents for today, and it seems that having got used to a new place a little and emboldened, he decided to look at the internet about his business before leaving. Julia kept the cursor on the window closing icon, but I didn't press it, leaving the window of Pasha's desktop open. Julia, of course, convinced herself that she just had to be aware of the affairs of her subordinates. But she also understood that now it has nothing to do with work. This Pasha had already overstayed his working hours and had every right to devote some time to his business, since he was in no hurry to get home. But she was just bored. A browser window opened, and the address began to be typed. The website has opened. Images of stylized handcuffs, whips, strap-ons, chastity belts, kneeling slaves, and arrogant ladies in latex appeared on a dark background. And the materials on this resource corresponded to the images. It could not be said that Julia was stunned by what was revealed to her eyes. By her age, Julia, of course, somehow saw all this, knew and imagined what it was for, although apart from handcuffs, and even then, not exactly like that, but gaming ones with pink fur, she had never tried any of this. Interesting. Julia poured herself some champagne from an unfinished bottle, which was left after the visit of the company's management, who on this occasion privately looked in on her personally to congratulate the birthday girl. After taking a sip, Julia stared intently at the monitor with a slightly intoxicated smile. There, at that time, A short video was opened where a very young boy licked and kissed the feet of an adult woman, but who at the same time only mocked him and constantly nagged and humiliated him. But I have very beautiful toes, much neater and more beautiful than this woman in the video. All my friends at the university envied me, especially in the summer, when I could wear sandals. That's just that my husband never really paid attention to it, Julia suddenly thought with some regret, with a smile, taking another sip. Yes, and this woman from the video was somewhat similar in type to Julia herself, but only by type. Julia noted with some satisfaction that she was not only superior to the actress with her toes, but also in everything else, although unlike the participant in the video, appearance was completely optional for Julia's own work. The video, however, ended very quickly and collapsed. So that's what you like, Pashenka. And you can't tell by the look of it, Julia thought with a smile. She had never been drawn to such a thing. It all always went somehow in parallel. She knew, she had heard about it, but she had never imagined such a thing with her husband, even in a playful way. Somehow it didn't catch on. But now, when the video rolled up, she suddenly realized that a pleasant warmth was spreading in the lower abdomen, and with her free hand from the champagne glass, she involuntarily stroked her thigh. No, of course she and her husband had different games for so many years of family life. She was an Amazon, and a prisoner, and a nurse, and whoever she was, but this was different. And then, over time, she and her husband somehow returned to the classics, and the craving for experiments somehow faded away. Of course, Julia was not going to expose anyone. What for? We are all adults and everyone has their own secrets and secret desires. Oh, if there had been such an internet and such a number of sites in my youth, I probably would have tried much more in my life. A smile touched the corners of Julia's lips. Julia finally rolled up the window, thoughtfully biting her lip. She suddenly realized that it wasn't so much the video itself that turned her on. If she had stumbled upon it on the internet herself, she would have immediately closed it, perhaps even wincing in disgust. She was aroused by the fact that she kind of spied on him and found out the secret of this young man. And this guy is kind of her subordinate, who depends on her after all. Her husband's call pulled her out of these reflections and increasingly indecent fantasies that had already begun to unfold in her mind's eye. Honey, I'm downstairs. Come out and let's go. Everyone is waiting for you in the restaurant. Her husband's cheerful voice came on the line. I'm already running. Don't leave without me. Julia laughed in response. She stood up and looked at herself in the mirror. Everything is fine. What are you doing here? He's almost the same age as your son. It's just the champagne that went to my head. Well, does the guy like this? What's it got to do with you? If there had been such videos before, you would have watched something else yourself and not only watched it, Julia convinced herself, turning off the computer and going out. But then her gaze fell on an unfinished bottle of champagne and a wine glass. Julia smiled slyly. There's nothing wrong with that. It'll even be funny. A crazy thought flashed through her head and, again, gave itself up to a pleasant warmth there, in the lower abdomen. I'm going to listen to jokes about 45 Womanberry again, all evening, and that I'm an 18-year-old girl with 27 summer experience. So at least I'll tune into it in the right way. Julia smiled even wider. Pasha, do I have to kick you out of work? What are you doing here? Of course, I am very pleased with you. You can't praise a new employee ahead of time, but that's the way it is. I won't deny the obvious. But I need you fresh and cheerful every day. Sitting late at work clearly does not contribute to this. Julia came out of her office into the hall with a smile, elegantly and even ostentatiously swinging her hips and holding a bottle of champagne with a glass in her hands. Of course, as she had expected, everyone except this new Pasha had long since disappeared. They were alone. Yulia Viktorovna, I didn't do much. I just wanted to figure it out. Don't worry, I'll be fresh and cheerful tomorrow. Thank you. But you are also still at work, by the way, Pasha replied with a smile, slightly embarrassed. Firstly, I am the head. Julia was surprised to realize that somehow she even savored this word. Rukovodittll? Secondly, I have a restaurant today, and I was waiting for my husband. So I have a completely different case and don't even compare it. She came up to Pasha's workplace with a smile, who was also already getting ready. I understand. Once again, happy birthday to you, Yulia Viktorovna. Pasha smiled. Thanks. But why only a dry, happy birthday? What about the wishes? I haven't heard them from you today. Don't you want to wish anything on yours? The boss? Julia, looking at her subordinate with the same smile, put a glass on his table and poured champagne, inwardly amused as he visibly embarrassed. Well, how else could it be? You've been in a new place for a week. You don't really know anyone or anything. I'm not at ease yet. Of course, at the congratulations ceremony of the boss, the main speech was pushed by completely different people, and Pasha, like anyone else in his place, stood on the sidelines and created extras. But now he was alone, and clearly caught off guard by such attention to his person. I'm waiting. Julia slyly looked at poor Pasha. Well, I wish you success in your work, career growth. Pasha began to squeeze something out of himself. Stop, stop, stop. I've heard about it many times today. My career growth depends on you as well, and I see that you are doing everything possible for this. So let's skip it right away. Julia looked at the embarrassed Pasha, smiling slightly, and running her manicured finger in circular movements along the edges of the glass in which champagne bubbles were playing. Let's start over. First of all, you're congratulating a beautiful woman. Do you agree with that? Or maybe, oh, what am I saying? At your age, the concepts of 45 years old and beautiful woman are probably incompatible. I mean a beautiful woman, and not just a well-preserved one. Julia seemed to be both asking and talking to herself at the same time. At the same time, showing Pasha that the popular opinion that from a certain point on a woman tries not to advertise her age clearly does not apply to her, and she is quite comfortable. When she finished, she looked at Pasha questioningly with a sly smile. Oh, come on, Yulia Viktorovna. Of course I agree. You just look gorgeous. Pasha nodded so vigorously that it became scary for the safety of his cervical vertebrae. Julia smiled again. What kind of fool would answer something else in the face of the leadership? But the kid seemed to be sincere in his admiration. I'm glad that our opinions agree on this, she said with a slight smile, and immediately continued. Secondly, you have your supervisor in front of you. So why are you saying all this sitting down while I'm standing in front of you? Julia, continuing to play with the edges of the glass with her finger and still smiling, innocently looked at the completely lost Pasha. Julia herself did not understand why just now the mention that she was a leader had acquired such a subtext for her. She had never attached such importance to it, but here she was literally looking for any little reason to remind Pasha about it. And every time it reverberated inside her being. It's just a 2-minute video, and it's very mediocre, so why? Damn, I think I'm wet. Yulia thought about all this with some incomprehensible fun, clearly experiencing some new sensations unknown to her before. Not realizing yet that the video was just a trigger that triggered a chain reaction in her thoughts and consciousness, and triggered something that had been dormant before. But outwardly, Julia remained calm. I'm sorry. Pasha got up hurriedly. He was a boy, of course, very conventionally, so it was a young man. But now his cheeks and ears were burning like a youngster's. So, is it just that the fabric is bulging in the area of the fly, or does the boy really like being scolded and brought up? Julia took a quick glance down, but immediately continued her game with the glass, ostensibly in anticipation, occasionally secretly casting quick glances down, trying to figure out how true her guess was. But in tight jeans, it was impossible to say with certainty. Whoa, it's much better this way. So what does a beautiful woman want to hear on her holiday? In addition to labor successes, of course, Julia, standing opposite Pasha, who stood at attention in front of the table, looked at him attentively with a smile and ran her finger over the glass. I wish you to be as beautiful, charming, charming. Pasha blurted out as if from a machine gun. Julia did not understand what made her more bursting, from excitement or from laughter. But her mood has clearly soared to the maximum. Well, you can already drink to that. I hope that it will be so and that I will not disappoint you further. Julia, grinning, drank a little from the glass. Although you obviously overdid it with the beautiful one, I'm actually married, and it's not appropriate for me to listen to such liberties from subordinates. It's good that my husband doesn't hear. Yulia summed up the toast with the same sly smile. I'm sorry, Pasha lowered his eyes, but you really are so. He suddenly looked hotly straight into Julia's eyes, but immediately looked down again, even more embarrassed. Damn, there really is something in this. I'm really all wet, thought Julia, looking at Pasha with a condescending smile. She never dreamed and did not share the zeal of some of her peers to date young boys. Maybe because everything was more or less in order on the personal front, and she never felt deprived of her husband's attention. Even if there were no such fiery passions as before, but after so many years of family life, everything was very even. But now, what this boy said, albeit confused and even funny, but so sincerely, intoxicated and amused self-esteem. So, not only do I see a beautiful woman in the mirror, and not only my peers, but also very young men. A rich inner world is wonderful, but sometimes it's nice to realize that they want you just like that, Yulia realized now. But my husband is not here now, but downstairs, waiting for me. Julia slyly looked at Pasha, who looked up for a moment and immediately lowered his gaze to the floor again. So it was nice to hear all this. Just keep that in mind the next time you compliment me. And remember that I'm not your girlfriend, but still your boss. Although I am a beautiful woman and I love compliments. Julia seemed to just thank her ward for the congratulations, but at the same time unobtrusively pointed out his place to him and made it clear to Pasha that she expected compliments and admiration from him in the future, and obviously earlier than the next birthday, completely puzzling and confusing her young subordinate. Well, the toast has been made. I drank to that. But what about the toasting himself? Julia handed Pasha her wine glass with a smile. Much of what was happening now was pure improvisation, and Julia herself still did not understand what had come over her. But the idea of only one glass was the original idea. Not knowing yet why, but Julia wanted to embarrass Pasha as much as possible, and without going beyond the bounds of external decency. Of course, she had no clear plan. That's just how she wanted to entertain herself. After a couple of glasses of champagne, which is not so much in half a day, and watched a video with the secret fantasy of his ward, Pasha hesitantly took the glass from Julia's hands. Yulia Viktorovna, here's to you. Swallowing, Pasha said hurriedly, looking into an almost full glass, from which his boss only symbolically sipped, still not daring to look into her eyes. You're going to drink to the bottom of your boss, aren't you? And again, the mention of the head added moisture to the panties. This is not a request. Otherwise, I'll fire you. Julia jokingly hurried him, laughing slightly, and, stretching out her hand, pushed Pasha's hand with a glass towards his lips, touching his fingers with her fingers. At the same time, Julia tried, of course, to make it look as if by accident, but it didn't look like that. Pushing Pasha's hand with the glass, she turned the glass 180 degrees, and now the trace of her lipstick on the glass was right in front of Pasha's lips. Pasha quickly raised his eyes, met Julia's gaze, and drank to the bottom in one gulp. Neither of them gave any sign that there was anything unusual in this toast. Great. What an obedient little subordinate I have. You understand the specifics of the work. You grasp everything on the fly. And now I see that there will be no problems with subordination either. Julia slyly glanced at Pasha, who put an empty glass on the table. She tried not to look so openly, but she couldn't take her eyes off the traces of her lipstick from the wine glass on this young man's lips, and how he, without noticing it, purely instinctively, purses his lips, rubs them against each other, erasing these traces, sometimes even helping himself with his tongue and clearly savoring the taste. Damn it! What's going on? Why am I soaking wet? It's just an innocent game. I did not feel such excitement even before making love with my husband. And even then, with that muscular instructor, Yulia thought excitedly, realizing that the game of embarrassing a young subordinate had clearly taken her somewhere further than she had planned. The ringing of her smartphone seemed to make both of them flinch. So much was there something in the air? No, not tension, but rather a strange pause, from which both, including Julia herself, did not know how to get out and what to say so that later, the next day, not to feel awkward or something like that. if you know what I mean. So, having shuddered at first, both immediately felt great relief that Julia had to be distracted. Yulchik, what are you doing there? How much longer do I have to wait for you? A little more and we won't find anyone. At least no one sober. Her husband's cheerful, but already slightly nervous voice rang in the receiver. Well, Leash, what are you crying about? I'm already running. Do you remember how old I was? Make allowances for that. Your old lady is already in a hurry to get to you, Julia laughed, as if waving off the obsession and heading for the exit. After finishing the call, she just wanted to say goodbye to Pasha as usual. But again, for some reason, the same video from the site flew before her mind's eye and, unexpectedly for herself, Julia suddenly turned around and after looking closely at Pasha, asked, Pash, isn't it difficult for you to work under the guidance of a woman? Surely it would be easier with a man? No, not at all. I really like being under your guidance. I would even say that it is much better than under the guidance of a man. Yes? But look, don't jump to conclusions. I'm actually a very strict leader. Yes, I'm happy with you, but still, for now, as a beginner, I'm making allowances for you. Then, when you figure it out, I will demand and ask much more and more strictly. And maybe I'll even punish you. But if you're smart, then the reward will be appropriate. Julia looked attentively at Pasha and, despite the rather joking tone, at that moment she was not smiling at all, but it seemed she wanted to see something in his eyes, something elusive at first glance. Damn, what am I talking about? What a strict leader. What kind of I will punish? It's good that no one from my department and other colleagues who know me hears this. I wish they would fuck up, Julia thought at that moment. No, Yulia Viktorovna, I am sure that I will be much better off under your guidance than under the guidance of any man. I am not afraid of punishments, but I will still try much harder to earn your praise. Pasha either moved away from her pressure and got used to it, or what Julia said touched some hidden strings of his soul, or he himself was seriously excited. But this time he met the gaze of his boss and he didn't look away. Well, look. Julia smiled strangely. Seeing how Pasha began to gather diligently for show again, he was obviously afraid of his own courage and trying to distract himself, and at the same time distract his boss from the topic from which he himself was getting more and more turned on. I like your zeal, and since that's the case, I think I'll ask you to stay. I have an errand for you. I'm letting you come into my office today. You saw how many bouquets I have there. Change everyone's water and trim the tips of the stems so that the flowers stand longer. And wash my coffee cup and champagne glasses. And anyway, clean up there. I didn't have time for myself in all this turmoil. And, to be honest, I don't understand at all why, given my status and position, I have to do it myself. And tomorrow, after the anniversary celebration, I'll probably come tired, not getting enough sleep, and I'll need coffee right away. So, don't stay late in the morning. Julia looked attentively at her young ward. How he will react to this blatant violation of labor regulations and shameless use of a subordinate for personal purposes. Of course, Yulia Viktorovna, Pasha, without any hint of displeasure, simply took off the jacket he had thrown over his shoulders and went to her office. And did the fabric on Pasha's jeans bulge even more in the area of the fly? No, she just imagined it. It's probably just the creases on the jeans and nothing more, probably. Yes, tomorrow. Yulia hurriedly said goodbye and quickly went out into the corridor. As soon as she closed the door behind her, she leaned back against it, exhaled deeply, and looked warily at the stockings on the inside of her thighs at the place where the skirt ended, and even ran her fingers there just in case. She was afraid to see smudges from her own secretions there. Fool! It seemed. Julia smiled with relief and somehow strained. Yes, she was very excited, but not so much that she splashed on the move. About waterfalls and fountains, these are still more figurative expressions. Yeah, wow, it turns out to be a jubilee. Although, what actually happened? There was nothing like that. I just talked to my subordinate. I have the right. Is not it so? Julia reasoned with herself, hurriedly going down the stairs, not understanding herself, but what exactly she wanted to convince herself of. After passing through the entrance, she went outside, looked around, saw her husband's car, waved to him, and hurriedly headed in his direction. Julia tried to distract herself, thinking about the upcoming banquet, but she couldn't get this video out of her head, except that she imagined herself in the place of those actors. Pasha. Julia clearly realized that attempts to imagine the slave from her husband's video in place did not end with anything. It was her husband, her man. She didn't want to be with him at all. It wasn't interesting to her. It didn't excite her at all. Her husband aroused her in a completely different role. So despite the rushing, excited fantasies, the desire to offer her husband to play mistress in her charming head did not arise even for a second. Yes, it was clearly not only about what to do, but it was also important to do it with whom. As soon as in this fantasy of hers, a confused and ingratiating Pasha became, in place of her confident husband, the leader in their family, so far only in her fantasies, then everything immediately began to play with other colors, and waves of excitement immediately rolled in one after another. So, stop imagining it already. Otherwise, it's not far to the ninth shaft at the most inopportune moment. Anyway, what nonsense is this? Me and this boy. Let's celebrate now. I'll digress a little. Then a night with my beloved husband. I think in the morning I'll just laugh at all this. And this Pasha? And what about Pasha? He is a good, diligent boy. He will be a good manager. And his desires and fantasies, this is his personal business. Everyone has the right to their own troubles, if they do not go with it to everyone else. Yes, it so happened that I found out about these fantasies of his. So what? As an intelligent, decent, and considerate woman, I certainly won't let on that I know about it. I'll just be his boss. The rest doesn't concern me. Tomorrow, I'll just thank him for the washed cup and the water in the bouquets, and we'll continue working as usual. He'll figure out for himself that he just imagined it. Let him look for girlfriends outside of work and have fun with them as he wants. And I'm too old for all this. I'm already how old Barry again. Somehow Julia even thought cheerfully, looking with a gentle, mischievous smile at her husband, who got out of the car to meet her, gallantly opened the passenger door in front of her and gave her his hand.